Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. We're just going to hear from Sally for a short time. She's going to talk to us about the resilience matrix, GIRFEC, and then you'll have plenty of time to go around the workshops. So I would urge you to take time and really make the most of that, to go around all the different stalls and find out about the developments you've heard about this morning. But if everyone could come back to the hall for 3:15, it's really important everybody returns for Anne Armstrong's final closing remarks. Okay, so I'll hand you over to Sally just now.
It's all right, I wasn't running away, really. There's a wonderful person called Chris here who makes everything work. I have to say, this is fantastic organisation. And it's not just the parking place, but everything just really so wonderfully well put together. I have to acknowledge what a long session that was before lunch, and I'm sorry for that. But you're going to have a shorter session this afternoon. And I've been specially asked to think about the resilience matrix with you. And that's because I think some people find it challenging. And I have to confess, I don't know whether Paul's still here, but I actually have responsibility for this wretched matrix. Because Bridget Daniel and I, with Robbie Gilligan from Dublin, you always need somebody from Dublin, put together this framework. This is years ago, and then suddenly we found that Wendy Rose and the other folk who'd been advising the Scottish Government decided that they would adopt the matrix as part of the GIRFEC material. And I'm gathering from the Aerts and Paerts that actually there are different messages coming out about how you use it. So I've been asked to try and be helpful about how it might be useful for you wherever you're working, whatever your role is. And so I'm going to talk us through the GIRFEC stuff a bit, but not a lot, because we can't test your resilience that much. And then I'm going to talk to you about using the matrix itself. So, and I'm going to stress a number of kind of simple points about the matrix and its use. The first one is, the main one is, this is not a formula. Okay, it's not a kind of recipe for getting the answer. It is, as it's as billed, it's a framework for thinking. So we're going to just think about that. Now, the reason for the kind of emphasis on this, some chums of mine who'd been in the LACSIG group, who've kind of been working nationally, said that there were different kind of modes of messages in training going around about how to use the matrix. One of which is that you plot a child in one of the 4 quadrants. Was never intended to be like that. So I'm going to just talk us into it gently. We'll take a little canter through, and then I'm going to illustrate it with some examples and hope that that helps a bit. Is that okay? And you'll have oodles of time to be looking at the stalls, and I'm dead keen to look at them as well. And I think I might try and winkle in. If I paid, do you think they'd let me come and do some of these courses? Who knows? Okay, now the emphasis here, my emphasis is on analysis. Because I don't know about you, see, you pick up somebody's case, somebody's been working with a family for ages, and you've got a file like this, yeah? And you've got in the file 26 tons of description. Anybody had this experience? It's like the travel directions when you ask somebody the way in the case, and they say, oh, I wouldn't start from here. Well, actually, you've no choice. You've got to start from here. So it's this, the need for a focus on how we analyze all the very carefully collected information that we get. And one of the things that bothers me, so for example, I'm seeing case files all the time. I'm working in a case in Glasgow at the moment where I've had 13 lever arch files, 13. and 2 of them are about contact. And they are descriptive. It just describes the mum walked across the room and picked up the cup and did what not. No analysis. Okay, so some of us have been trying to support practitioners with analysis, nurseries, wherever, by structuring formats and frameworks for helping us to kind of distill from all the information the key messages about the impact on the child and the child's lived experience. So it's really to help us. The idea of the matrix was to help with analysis, but I'm not sure that actually it's being explained in such a way as to be as helpful as it might be. I've written a paper on analysis for the government, which hasn't seen the light of day yet. I don't know whether it will, but it's kind of along these sorts of lines, so to support people in thinking about how they might use it. So I'm just going to kind of trot through, and we'll see where we go, and I'll watch you for closing eyes. This is the death slot at the Glasgow Empire, isn't it? Okay, right. So distilling analysis from assessment. Okay, so we're going to think about the 3 frameworks and how we might use the 3 frameworks. So what the idea is that we pin down some of the initial concerns and worries, that we share concerns with others using a common language. So it's again what Alison said about the common language, working out individually and collectively what may be going wrong, working out a plan for what to do about it, and guiding the actual doing. I have to say one thing that drives me potty. Do you ever see this? Endless chronologies. Do you have endless chronology? Perhaps you don't. With every fine detail of everything that happened. When I think, actually, first of all, when I take on a new piece of work, what I'm trying to do is distill the chronology so that I actually am analysing the chronology, first of all, so that I know where I'm actually going. I'm not surprised that panel members are beside themselves in some areas, I'm sure not here, when they have 20 pages of a chronology to wade through with all sorts of unnecessary detail before they get to the nub of the crux of what we're asking. So I think it's useful for us to be revisiting how are we using the framework, just having another wee think about it. And I'm hoping I might even be a bit helpful about some of this. Okay, so I'm saying that one of the major skills, like we were talking about the key skills that we have to have this morning, an understanding and knowledge of healthy development, an ability to recognize it, an ability to identify when things are going wrong, and to be curious about what reasons, et cetera, so there are key pieces of information that we need, but the critical issue is analyzing that in terms of thinking about what all the information you're collecting means for what we might need to do or not do in a particular situation to try and ensure that the child's needs are met. Okay, so Paul would like this from a systemic point of view. We're not just thinking about getting it right for every child. We're thinking about getting it right for every child in the context of collaborative work with families and with communities. Okay, so we have to think about national guidance for child protection. I would say to you, the West of Scotland child protection trainers have been doing some really interesting work, and one of them, you might well have this up on your wall, but I really like the fact that what they're doing is applying the national risk framework and setting it round the My World Triangle. Do people have that? Yeah. There are some nods, but there are some people who are not nodding. Bit mixed. I find that really helpful because I think it can be a real aid memoir so that we're thinking about what I need from people who look after me and the risk factors associated with that. Equally, you know, how I grow and develop the risk factors with that. So that is useful, and quite a number of practitioners that I know have it on their walls. So they've got the My World Triangle, and then outside of that, all on the one piece of paper, yes, they've got the risk factors. So some of you are familiar with that. And I think, did you find that helpful? Ooh, no answer was the stern reply. Okay. Right, so we've got National Guidance, Child Protection, National Risk Framework, and we've got our GIRFEC framework. So let's just think about that. So we've got the good old well-being web. So the Shinari wheel helps us in the identification of concern. Now, my worry about this is I see papers where people have written screeds underneath each one of the Shinari indicators. Screeds and screeds and screeds. Whereas it was my understanding that they actually are highly relevant, of course, but they're meant just to trigger concerns. You know, they're meant to get us asking ourselves, do we have a concern in this area? You know, what might be the kind of any stark concerns in this area? So what we've been trying to do in some authorities where we feel that people are getting pretty exhausted, even going round the wheel before they get to the My World triangle, is we're saying, okay, use it as it's meant to be used, use it as a trigger for concern, you know, note your concerns concisely, and then, of course, we can use it as a measure at the end to see if our interventions have had any impact on the child's well-being in the different areas. My World triangle, prompting the pulling together of key information in an ecological and holistic way. And I think that's where we're looking to see who has what information around the triangle. And then we're using the matrix then to pull together the picture, the distillation of the significance of all the information we've gathered. So well-being wheel, here we go. So we're thinking, you know, do we have concerns under these different areas? You'll be so familiar with doing that. My interest is in how much people are feeling they have to write about that. My experience is people write a lot about this. So when I'm talking about GIRFEC, I go, and they're so knackered with that they're pretty tired by the time they get there, and they're exhausted by the time they get there. So I see lots of case materials with none of this or very little of it. So I'm sure that's not the case here, but I'm very interested in how you're actually using the matrix, because I know there are some mixed views about it. Okay, so don't exhaust yourself with the wheel, is my suggestion, because that's providing a simple framework for identifying concerns at the initial stage, helps you to be clear about specific interventions and actions, desired outcomes, but helps with the benchmarking of progress also. So you're checking back. So it's your initial triggers and you're checking back. Useful to think about what outcomes and differentiating actions from outcomes, so that we'll be really clear about how we're going to measure progress, success, or lack of success. So the My World triangle. So I'm aware that we'll have lead professionals and named persons in the room. You know, different roles. We're going to address that hopefully in the examples that I'm going to use with you. So if the named person's not sure what's getting in the way of the child's needs being met, or feels the information is very much lacking, and or is not at all sure their own actions will satisfactorily address the concerns without other collaboration or support from the family or whoever else, and or feels their own agency has insufficient resources to help in addressing concerns, then it's helpful to explore links with other professionals contributing to the completion of the triangle. So when you're completing your triangle, I'm sure you get to the point you're aware of what gaps are where. Bless you, somebody having a sneeze there. Okay, so pulling all of these together, what I need from people who look after me. Remember I was saying to you I was going to ping you a wee email of, you know, what to look for in interaction? Do you remember I said that? We've written that so that it mirrors what I need from people who look after me. Deliberately, so it meshes with what you're doing already. Because what I'm not interested in is adding to what you're doing in terms of writing. You know, you do not need that. I think what we need is a distillation of the requirements so that we're really clear that we're using these pieces as we as we need to use them. So you're very familiar with this, so that we're contributing, and that you identify where you've got your gaps, where you've got your missing information, because that is going to be important for analysis. If you've got really significant areas of missing information, it might be that, you know, that's going to interfere very much with your analysis. Okay, so here we come to the matrix. So 4 terms: vulnerability, adversity, protective environment or factors, and resilience. And I'm going to explore how we might apply those as relevant in 3 particular case examples that are very different in a minute, just to give you a bit of a flavour. I'll also say to you that this good old West of Scotland Child Protection Trainers Group have also undertaken an initiative with South Lanarkshire. There's a wonderful guy called David Campbell who does animations. So he's done an animated version of how to use the matrix, which we've just finished and which will come on stream for you very quickly. You've got such close collaboration with South Lanarkshire. I'm sure that'll come your way very quickly. Okay, but it will be there to give you a bit of a different example in a different kind of mode, really. Okay, so vulnerability, and we're going to, as I say, model this as we go along. Characteristics of the child, family circle, wider community which might threaten or challenge healthy development. Okay, adversity, life events or circumstances which are currently posing a threat to healthy development. So when I'm thinking about vulnerability, we're going to just break this down a bit in a minute. I'm quite often thinking about what's happened in the past that might have rendered this child more vulnerable to adversity now. Okay? So, and then adversity, I'm thinking what's going on now that might be a cause for concern. What are the current circumstances of adversity that we should be concerned about? And then thinking about positive factors, positive environment, positive relationships, factors in the child's environment, acting as buffers to the negative effects of adversity, and thinking about the child's qualities and characteristics, including the child who's a bit of a toe rag, you know what I mean? The child who maybe is very challenging in their behaviours, but there's something about them that pulls the adults in and keeps us in, sticking there with them because of that capacity in them, which is a resilient quality. Okay, so as we were saying before, when we looked at resilience, what we're thinking about is a secure base, what we provide, educational support, etc., etc. But we're also supporting the development of skills through social competencies and positive values, those last 2, which we use a lot with children who are school age and older. Okay, so some of those factors of resilience might be natural qualities of the child, and some of them might be skills they've managed to acquire which are protective. Okay, so it's considering both of those. Okay, so using the resilience matrix, especially helpful for analysis in more complex circumstances or those which generate either acute concern or uncertainty. Bridget and I, who wrote this together, had some debate about it recently. We've kind of sometimes get together to see how our adopted baby, the resilience matrix, is doing. Have they cut the hair, changed the name, all the rest of it. And actually, we sometimes have a slight difference of view about this, because I will say, from a practitioner's perspective, although I have massive respect for our Bridget, she helps me keep clear about concepts, I tell you, in the way nobody else in the world does. But I think that yes, it's valuable for complex cases where we are concerned about very significant risk, but it's also helpful especially for workers in universal services when they're thinking, I'm not sure how worried I should be. And sometimes it really helps to use the matrix to pull together the information you've got and think, okay, where does this take us in terms of worry about significant harm for this child, or worry about development to potential. Okay, so it can be helpful to practitioners who are working with children, young people who are looked after, either away either at home or away from home, who are vulnerable at home for whatever reason, those who are on the Child Protection Register, and those about whom there's a professional concern of more uncertain origins. Because sometimes actually pursuing those questions, A, can help us to be helpful in a collaborative way as early as possible without any worry about, oh, golly, we have to push for compulsory measures of supervision. But also, it just helps support the worker. It helps to support the worker in whatever setting. So whether that happens in supervision, whether you do that individually, whether you do that especially with colleagues who are also know the family, ever so helpful. Now, I'm just going to expand for you a bit the way that I think about vulnerability. So qualities and characteristics of the child, so that might include things like temperament, crucially, as well as issues like disability, learning problems, other kinds of difficulties. Parents' or carers' expectations. So quite often you'll have distorted expectations in one direction or another, perhaps very low expectations, perhaps as the child with significant disabilities, where there's been worry about health, whatever as well, where parents are very, very protective. And whilst we can understand that, we also need to perhaps think about how we can support the parents to expand their realistic expectations of the child. Okay, so parents or carers' expectations. Does that make sense? Do you see what I mean? So those expectations might be associated with intellect, capacity, ability, or it might be linked with gender, temperament. So in individual family cultures, parents' expectations can be very powerful in terms of the way that they impact on potential vulnerability of the child. Or there may be factors in the parent's history, as we talked about earlier today. So it may be that, for example, I've two situations that I'm working with at the moment. One where a parent was abused themselves in childhood, and when their first child got to the age where the parent was abused, so the parent was abused aged 4, the child gets to that age, and the parent's almost so anxious that just the developmental stage has triggered the anxiety in the parent, that they're so protective that they're affecting the child's capacity for exploration as well as increasing the child's anxiety. And another situation where the child has reached the same age as the parent when they were sexually abused, actually, but this parent is kind of somehow blocked off from her own experiences, and she's actually effectively repeating and reenacting the risk factors that were around for her, involving herself with dangerous men, allowing different people to look after the children. So this can have an impact in all sorts of different kinds of ways. And of course, we're focusing on supporting parents wherever we can. But there may be really crucial factors in the parent's history, like insecure attachment. We talked about that earlier on. So that your early initiatives that we've explored this morning, all the different ways you have of working with parents, very powerful in helping to address some of those issues. It's also really helpful to think about the impact of past experiences that the child had before you met them, or before this point when you're looking at them. So I always think of the matrix as a snapshot. So it's a snapshot of where we are now. What's the child's predicament now? And what are the different positive and negative forces bearing upon that predicament? Okay, and I think, and just reminding you about the meaning of the child that we talked about earlier on, that may be an important factor as well. Okay, so the aims here, I don't know how clearly you can see that, it's a bit complex, but what we're trying to do is assess the impact of previous and current adversities upon the child and to nurture the child's capacity to make use of and benefit from protective resources. So we're going from vulnerability to resilience. And what we're doing in terms of the adversity heading there is identifying and ameliorating or reducing the impact of adverse factors on the child and identifying supportive, protective resources. So we're going from the south to the north and from the west to the east, if you like. So that's what we're trying to do when we're thinking about analysis in the context of planning. Okay, so back to this simple framework of vulnerability, adversity, protective environmental factors, and resilience. And what I'm going to do is just take you through 3 particular situations, and then we'll maybe have some questions if that's, and see whether that helps at all. Okay, so again, I'm reminding you this is a framework for thinking. It's not a formula. So it was interesting, Cheryl and I were talking about, what do you do when you're, in terms of recording this? And I suppose I'm used to workers preparing themselves for discussions, often with supervisors or with other colleagues, about the child's predicament by thinking of bullet points. Not thinking of, endless narrative, but thinking about bullet points of particular issues of relevance, factors of relevance under each of the headings. So we're just going to think about Mary, who's aged 4 months. In terms of vulnerability, so the vulnerabilities that this child is bringing to the current reflection on her situation right now, low birth weight, so qualities, characteristics of the child, that just happened, low birth weight. Mother's own history of attachment, factors in the parent's history. Mother's immaturity and impulsiveness. She's very impulsive in her interactions, both with the wee one, but also with professionals. Concerns about failure to thrive. That's been concerns in the past that, in the last few months early on, golly, how is this child progressing in terms of weight gain, etc. Other things having been excluded, other worries, physical worries having been excluded. Father's very dominating of mother, so you've got that imbalance of parental relationships. History of domestic conflict between them, so that's right up to the birth, so worrying history of domestic conflict in pregnancy, but mum very committed to staying in this relationship. And father allegedly, on top of everything else, a drug user, and we thought a dealer probably too. And so that's thinking about vulnerability. What vulnerabilities does this child, this little one, bring to this situation? And you'll see I've gone through the headings of what. So in the past, this child, we've had difficulty, worries about the child thriving physically, etc. So where are we now? Under adversity, sudden weight loss. So the child had been gaining weight really very slowly, but what we've got now, bless you, is sudden weight loss. Found with soiled nappy in clothes and filthy and cold conditions. So we've got new worries. And we are really worried because the police come to the meeting with us and share that there are major concerns about drug dealing in this household. And thinking about what that means for a tiny baby, all the coming and going of people heftily involved in drug dealing and drug using activity. Continuing intense parental conflict. Mother dominated by father, but also saying, wanting to prioritize the relationship, saying, I'm staying with him, we're okay, everything's all right. But in the context of that, this little one is losing weight to the point that we're really worried. And there's avoidance of the health visitor, probably more worryingly, and conflict with maternal grandparents. So real kind of acute concerns at the moment. So we've got the worries from the child's existing vulnerability, a combination of low birth weight, but also parental factors coming in. And currently, under adversity, we've got new worries, real worries. So protective factors, Mary was a wanted child. The maternal grandparents are involved and concerned, even though there's actually conflict with the parents. In terms of resilience, Mary feeds and sleeps well, so she's in a rhythm. So she will feed, so we're thinking there's not an actual feeding problem. The issue lies elsewhere. And she's responsive and alert. Okay, so we're thinking about, now what was decided in that situation was folk getting together was that they were so concerned about the weight loss in particular. She's so young, she's completely dependent on her parents, there are worrying signs of physical neglect, and this weight loss is very, very worrying. And uncertainty about parents' ability to prioritise Mary's needs on their own, above their own relationship. And I suppose what that represented for us was a really, the one new concern represented the tipping point. Does that make sense? The weight gain, weight loss, sorry, is a major tipping point. And what we were also concerned about was that the information that we had from police colleagues about father's behaviour was that he was very intimidating and aggressive, and that this was very challenging for the maternal grandparents. So the question is, how protective could they be if they actually took care of the child? So obviously, with the plans, we want to establish safe, secure, consistent caregiving, and we want to find out whether or not either or both Mary's parents can care safely for her, and if not, whether the maternal grandparents or other family members may be able to offer predictability of nurturing the long term. So we're at the point of establishing how much work we can do with parents. You can imagine how your own resources might be used really positively in this sort of situation. But it was that exploration together. As soon as we got together and looked at the factors, what's new, the new thing, the weight loss and the worrying poor physical care were really tipping factors. So you can think that from that we were thinking about how we structure actions and work, to plan focused work with mum and dad, having a working agreement. And crucially, there's people, Donald and Giuradini, who wrote a wonderful article about in Child and Family Social Work Journal about the parent's capacity for empathy, so that when we're assessing parenting, going beyond just assessing interaction, but also thinking what capacity do these parents have when we're exploring with them the child's experience of the caregiving circumstances, all the conflicts, not being clean and warm, etc., etc., etc. So that being crucial. Mother's ability to put Mary's needs before those of Mary's father, assessment of the capacity of the maternal grandparents. Does that make sense as an example? Any questions about that one? Does it make sense? One of the big questions comes up is, what's the difference between what should be under vulnerability and what should be under adversity? Ring any bells? Yeah. Does that make a bit more sense of it? That you're bringing those, so it's remembering those particular factors, temperament, parents' history, parents' expectations, and the impact of adversities in the past, before, even though this little one is only a few months old. And then looking at what are the current circumstances that obviously in this situation we'd have a really close eye on, wouldn't we? Okay, let's just think about the next example. So again, we're thinking about these headings. And this is a situation that's rather different. So this is an 8-year-old. Now, what vulnerability might he be bringing to the present situation? So what has happened to him which might actually make him more vulnerable to current adversity? So involvement in past domestic conflict, negative effects of his mother's emotional withdrawal when postnatally depressed in the past, parental towards his mother and younger siblings. So this is a little chap who's 8. He's got 2 younger sisters. And the worry was he was coming to school late, dishevelled, hungry, and increasingly anxious and distressed. So there were real kind of signals that there was something going wrong. And there was an awareness that his mum had been up and down in her mental health in the past. She had not reacted well to the parental separation, and at different times she's struggled. So this little boy has already experienced that. And as a response to that, he's become parental, which we worry about when basic needs are not met. So where are we now in terms of current circumstances? Mum's currently become depressed again and emotionally withdrawn and is saying, I can't care closely for them, I'm so upset, I keep bursting into tears, I don't know what's wrong with me, this is terrible, very distressed about it, but unable to either respond or reach out. And this is intensifying Tommy's anxiety because this situation is recurring for again, it's a repeated adversity. So Tommy's highly anxious at the moment. His instinct is to look after his younger sisters, and he's really worried about his mum. And there's a loss of nurturing routines. And he's also, because this separation happened not all that long ago, he's separated from his dad. So what are the protective factors here? And then we'll think about who might be involved with Tommy. So protective factors, positive care and attachments to both parents. So there has been positive care in the past. Mum's mental health has been up and down, but generally speaking, with support, she can hold it together. Attached to paternal grandparents who are very supportive of his mother. Dad is consistent in caring, concern, and in contact, maintaining contact, although not able to care for the child, not in circumstances where he can care for Tommy or his little sisters. And there's a positive, confiding relationship for Tommy with his class teacher, absolutely crucial in these circumstances. He was beginning to signal to her that he was really not okay. And a really, really positive factor, his mother trusts both the health visitor and his teacher. Resilience, winning personality, seeks adult help, and intelligent. Intelligence is noted as a particular factor in resilience. What I would say to people who work in really difficult, compromised circumstances with children is sometimes intelligence can be a bit of a mixed blessing. And we might find that with the next case. If your circumstances are particularly dire. But this little chap is intelligent, he's doing well at school, he receives a lot of praise and support. School are absolutely crucial for this little boy. Okay, so when we're thinking of getting together, teacher, health visitor getting together, there's no social worker involved, consultation with family members, we're reflecting, what have we got here? We've got Tommy, who has experienced good care and positive attachments. Supportive adults are available. Respite care and positive paternal contacts available. Resources can be harnessed through the protective factors in his circumstances. In other words, the grandparents and his dad. And crucially, he trusts and confides in his worries. So he has a way of expressing his anxieties. So it may well be in these circumstances that those people working in universal services are able to work with the family to manage this situation, which is in fact what happened. In fact, the children went to their grandparents for a time, with good contact with their mum and with their dad, and actually mum had an opportunity to work with her GP around some medication for her depression and therapeutic support. So that actually and gradually she got back on track and it was possible for them to go back. So the matrix can still be helpful as a focus, I think, for pulling together concerns, assessing the available resources and formulating a plan. So those are in situations where we've got worries and actually thinking about, the health visitor having worries about the younger ones and school having worries about Tommy, getting together and being able to come up with a plan. Does that make sense? Speak to me. You all right? Yeah? Good. Good. Okay. Right. So, and again, let's just model a final one. So this is thinking about, again, using that framework. So we're starting to think about vulnerability, then resilience. So we're thinking about Angie. Now, the point here is keeping our eye on adolescence. So I guess I'm reminded through kind of work with adolescents, and we've got people from CALMS here and all over. Adolescents can be more at risk than we imagine. So just thinking about how seriously we take this situation. So this is a situation that's much more serious. Vulnerability. Here's Angie, 13 years, poor early attachments, mistrustful of adults, hides her needs and feelings. Now, this child can look okay. She can look streetwise and cool, and she can look all right. So she does not signal her distress externally in any clear kind of way. And the problem was that people were thinking she was all right. Well, you know, the care was pretty crummy, her attachments were poor, but, you know, she's okay. And sort of worrying until we work closely with some adolescents, we don't realise how distressed they are underneath. Poor social skills, I wonder why. Not hard to see why. Lashes out when challenged, scapegoated by her mother because she resembles her father. So that's the meaning of the child bit from the vulnerability, those vulnerability points that I was making. This has been long-lasting, this scapegoating. So she's never felt as close to either of her parents as her siblings. Right, what are the adversities? Recent intense and repeated domestic violence, physical abuse from her brother, and nobody's believing her. Nobody's supporting her. She's being blamed for this again. And what's really worrying everybody is recent extreme risk-taking behaviours. She's putting herself very much at risk. So we took that as a signal of acute distress, that we were worried enough about her anyway. And this makes the point, she's still scapegoated, and actually she's newly being blamed for this sibling conflict. This must be her fault. We know that children, even though they may all be neglected in a sibling group, a child who is marked out for scapegoating suffers much more from challenge to their self-esteem and confidence and other areas of their development, as well as their attachment security. So we're worrying about her. Now, the point this makes is people will say maybe, well, where should I put the scapegoating? In this situation, I would put it under both vulnerability and adversity. Now, does that make sense? Because it's been a factor in the past, it's continuing, and the fact that it's happening now would suggest that whatever interventions have gone on have not actually reduced that, the impact of that adversity. In fact, we're worried about new adversities and the impact on her. There are positive factors. She's got a good link with her guidance teacher, and she's artistic, this lassie. And she's valued for that very much in school, although not at home. Drama queen, they call her at home. Okay, healthy attachments to paternal aunt, and a warm relationship with her older sister. So she's got some sibling comfort within the family relationships. But the strongest adult connection is out with the family. So resilience, she's intelligent, she has a sense of humour, she loves dance, drama and art, and she's got this warm, confiding sibling relationship, which we know is kind of money in the bank. Okay, so helpful, high level of vulnerability arising from risk-taking behaviours in the context of parental rejection and very poor self-esteem. So the scapegoating's been long-lasting, so her previous vulnerabilities intensified by the fact that under adversity, right now, taking a snapshot now, there's still that consistent adversity. And we're really worried about the effects on her self-esteem. Teacher very worried about low mood, whereas she wasn't signalling any distress before, very low in mood, which is a really new sign, which is very worrying. So we've got scapegoating under both of those headings. And one of the other points being that adolescents are more vulnerable than often thought, and we know that from some of the research into the kinds of things that can happen, not only suicide, but other adversities that can impact very negatively on the way they, put themselves at risk, etc., low self-esteem, who cares? Lots of very acute adversities for some very neglected or rejected adolescents. So we're thinking about what we did was we placed her with her. She was placed with her aunt. Her parents weren't bothered. They were happy for her to go to her aunt, but we were worried about the lack of care, and we were worried about how much cooperation we would get, so thinking about compulsory measures. Good relationships with two teachers, continuing at school, offers crucial protective factors. So if there's anybody in education here who thinks that's not crucially important, it absolutely is. But I use that case example to illustrate that you might have the same factor under both headings. Okay, hopefully that makes a bit of sense. And I think you can get printouts of this so that you can have a look at it again if you're thinking at the moment, this is after lunch and I can't concentrate. Okay, so in summary, the 3 frameworks help us to think about and assess the child's unmet needs in all domains, reasons for the needs not being met, parental capacity to meet needs with help, parental willingness and proven motivation to adapt and develop caring capacities and skills. And also to think about whether compulsory measures are necessary. Is that going to be vital? And in Angie's situation, that was a major thought. And we know that parents can find it difficult to cooperate and collaborate. We try on a non-compulsory basis. All of your rich learning about the different methods that you're using here can really support those collaborative efforts and initiatives. But what we know is it's, even with the best intentions, it's not always helpful. It's not always successful because some parents aren't able to use this kind of help, and sometimes we need other measures. Okay, so finally, just in summary, I would say it's not a formula, it's a framework for thinking. It's a simple framework which allows you to bring your information as an individual working with the family and putting that together either with your supervisor if you're on your own or with others who are around the family, so that together you can begin to analyse and make sense of what the current circumstances mean for the child, bearing in mind any previous vulnerabilities that might exacerbate the impact of the adversities at the moment. Okay, so it's not a formula, it's a framework for thinking. It's really interesting. We developed something for workers in one authority, and we put analysis and some questions, like those questions about interact, and somebody had put not applicable. So I suppose I would say that we always need an opportunity to be supported in our analysis, even if we're working singly in a situation, and this can be a really helpful framework for helping us to think together, not only to plan, but also to review the impact of what we've been doing. Okay, now I'm not going to say any more, but I'm going to tell you a little attachment story to finish with, okay? And this links with Tina's point from this morning, that this is a lifetime issue. So this is a little personal story, just to finish on a less tedious note, hopefully. So my old mum, Alice, when she was aged about 86, she lived up the road from us in Edinburgh. And so I was kind of in and out seeing her lots. When I was a little girl, she used to do exactly what Tina does, which is put the perfume on the hanky. Okay, so I'd go off to a difficult experience. I mean, I was not having a bad time in my family, but I still had difficult experiences, you know, difficult transitions, frightening things, like speaking to 270 people. Where is she now? And so she used to put her perfume on my hanky, and I used to do exactly what Tina describes, which is, you know, quietly get the hanky out. Well, we got to the point where my dear old mum was 86, And I was going away working quite a lot. And one day she said to me, in High Dudgeon, she said, don't you think it's time you put your perfume on my hanky? Thank you.